All right. Well, thank you for joining today. My name is Jim Shine. I'm the CTO here at Top Step. What we're going to be sharing today is tips on how to integrate OpenAir with just other tools' API connections. With that said, we'll dive right in. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. We're going to go through integrations with OpenAir in a kind of an overview. We're going to talk about the benefits and downsides of middleware and how to script an integration. We're going to talk about authentication into OpenAir or into other tools from OpenAir, as well as potential obstacles with this type of integration. We'll show you a list of the successful integrations that we have done this way so far. So I have to give you a jargon warning right out of the gate that this might get overly technical. I try not to go that path, but every now and then I find myself down that route. So I apologize if this gets too tech. All right. So OpenAir provides some standard integrations with NetSuite and Microsoft Exchange and Microsoft Project. Now, I believe the Microsoft Project tool has been sunset. I haven't seen it in use for quite some time, but there are still integrations directly built into OpenAir for NetSuite, and then they have a Microsoft Exchange tool that they provide that you can use to integrate with Exchange. Not a heavily used tool, but it's out there. In addition to that standard integration, particularly with NetSuite, OpenAir provides a business intelligence connector for extracting report data out of OpenAir. Now, that's a separate tool that you can purchase from OpenAir. It's actually just a module within OpenAir that they enable when you purchase it. It allows you to send report data through an OData protocol to an OData server that you can then pick up and read from other tools. It's a very useful tool. They provide an integration manager tool for importing and exporting text files. That's not quite as useful. That tool is a bit outdated and has some significant downsides to its use. And they also have an automated backup service for automating backups. What if you need an integration with these tools? This is where the scripting engine in OpenAir can be very valuable. There are primarily three options if you're going to connect with any of these tools or any quote unquote modern software. You have a middleware option, you have an external code option, you have an OpenAir scripting option. We're going to talk about what these are and what their pros and cons are. So middleware option, there are a number of tools out there that sell themselves as one-stop integration tools. So you can build the integration within these tools and just connect to OpenAir and connect to whatever other system you're using. And it's usually object-based, visual-based, so you don't have to code much, if anything. They're designed to be user-friendly. A couple examples, Del Boomi is one, MuleSoft puts one out, Celigo puts one out. There's quite a few of them out there. The pros, they use these pre-built connectors, so you don't have to worry about trying to connect to these systems, which can often be the most challenging part of an integration. They're designed to be user-friendly, and they're well supported. There's communities out there with lots of documentation, lots of forums that you can join to get help with using these middleware tools. The cons, they're usually pretty expensive. This is not usually a cheap solution. They are also limited by those connectors. For example, I know of one tool, I'm not going to put them on the spot, but I know of one tool that provides a connector to OpenAir that doesn't access all of OpenAir's API capabilities. Does not allow you to see everything that OpenAir can do through its API. So you're limited by what that connector allows you to see and do. And you can have a pretty high learning curve with these. Even though they're designed to be user-friendly, they all have their own design. They all have their own way of doing things, and it's not always easy to figure out how these work. There's a little bit of a overhead in terms of that learning curve. Now, you also have an external code option, which would be building something outside of any of these tools from scratch. Build your own tool that connects OpenAir to whatever tool it is you're using. Um, Pros are there, it's highly flexible. Whatever you want it to do, you code it to do. As long as those APIs support it, you're in business. You can do whatever you want. And a lot of organizations are going to have folks in-house that can build these things. They'll have people with C sharp skills or .NET skills or JavaScript skills or whatever it is that they want to use to build these connections and build these integrations. So you can do it with internal resources instead of having to bring in contractors, what have you. The cons for this requires an OpenAir API key, which I should have mentioned, as does the middleware option. This is an extra purchase from OpenAir that you have to have in order to access OpenAir's APIs from outside of OpenAir. Usually the dev cycles on these things are quite long because you're building it from scratch. You're building everything. You have to start understanding OpenAir's data model, etc. It can be a pretty long dev cycle depending on how complicated it is. And then you've got to also maintain it throughout its life cycle, ensure it's compatible with any OpenAir releases or any releases of the tools that you're integrating with, and any other maintenance options that come about are all on you. So this is a pretty high overhead. This is going to be the most flexible option. It's also going to be typically the most expensive in terms of both dollars and time. The third option is the one we're going to be kind of highlighting today, which is OpenAir scripting. What this is it allows you to build a script within OpenAir that reaches out to your other tools and pushes and pulls data as needed from those tools. Pros of this, because you're coding this is code. I got to make that clear. It's code within OpenAir. It's as flexible as your external code, virtually. It's going to have a shorter development time because it's standard JavaScript, and the objects that you need to interact with OpenAir are pre-built into the tool that you can just access from the scripting engine. It's pretty low maintenance for that same reason that a lot of the tools that you need to access OpenAir are pre-built, and you don't have to maintain them. And there's no extra licensing, meaning you don't need a middleware cost. You don't need an API key for OpenAir to do this. That's a common misconception, even amongst some of the folks that are selling the tool, that if you're going to integrate with an OpenAir script, that you need an API key from OpenAir, and that's just simply not the case. There is no extra licensing in order to do an OpenAir script to reach out to other tools. The cons of this, it does require JavaScript skill for development and maintenance. Now, I'll highlight another piece of that is a bit of a con. This requires JavaScript ES5 skill. Now, if you don't know what that is, JavaScript releases versions of its platform every so often. And it has historically labeled them with an ES and a number. And ES5 is pretty old. There was a big upgrade to their platform with ES6, and none of those features are available in OpenAir's scripting engine. It's strictly ES5 or earlier. We've been asking them to upgrade the engine that they use within the OpenAir scripting module. Hopefully that'll take place at some point. But right now we're restricted to ES5. It's not a huge downside. It's basically what folks would consider quote unquote vanilla JavaScript. If somebody knows JavaScript, they know ES5, they just probably know more than ES5 as well. So that's what we're going to talk through a little bit today. The OpenAir scripting engine that we use for this was released in 2014, primarily for internal data manipulation within OpenAir. It's basically just plain JavaScript, as I mentioned, with a set of functions that are specific to OpenAir. And it uses OpenAir's API behind the scenes. Now, in 2019, they added the ability to, quote unquote, talk to other tools using standard protocols. Um, so at this point, we can use the OpenAir scripting engine to communicate with any cloud or web-based tool that has a RESTful or a web service-based API. Now, I didn't document this because I don't like to advertise this a lot, but you can actually integrate to intranet-based tools as well. For example, Jira offers, or at least offered, I think they might have sunset it by now, but they had a version of Jira that was on premises. So it basically lived within a server inside an organization's firewall. That's not really cloud for sure. It's not what I would consider web-based, but it was accessible to OpenAir. As long as we could get a hole in that firewall, we could get to it and build an integration, and we have. So, like I said, I don't like to advertise that kind of thing, but there are other options besides just being out there in the cloud. Well, that's far and away the most prevalent these days. So that feature's been around for 3 or 4 years, and it functions the same way that you've seen any other standard integration tool, which basically is what they call CRUD. And it's not the kind of CRUD that's on the bottom of my car or whatever that is. Not sure what that is. CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. And all of those functions are available within the OpenAir scripting engine. They started out with just create and read early on, and we'd asked them to include the update and delete functions. It only took them one release before they had those in place also. So all 5 of those standard web services, post, get, put, patch, and delete, are all available. It's actually pretty simple. How simple is it? This is the code required to read a record from an external system, in this case, Salesforce. You specify the address of the web service, and you specify your authentication, which we'll get into here in just a bit, and you send it to this GET. Again, this is one of those functions within the OpenAir scripting engine that facilitates these types of integrations. So you don't have to try to build a connector from scratch. It knows what to do when you send it that GET. And it connects to Salesforce and returns data. And that's a read. And right there is 7 or 8 lines of code to get that done. An update is just about as simple as you can see. It's you set up the body of your request. What exactly is it you're trying to update? And then you send it. This is a Jira update in this case. And you give it a URL, the location of the web service. You send the body, you send your authentication again, and you're done. And these response variables, issue, update, response, and in this case, account, will hold the information back from the system that you're reaching out to, so you can see what code you get if it was a successful update or if you had an authentication problem or something of that nature. And then you can process that code because it usually comes back as straight JSON. Pretty simple, really. The only thing that gets a little tricky is this. Authentication to any external tool depends entirely on that tool. So there is not one authentication model that works from OpenAir scripting to any tool out there. It's completely dependent on the tool that you're integrating with. The 3 most common methods that we've seen are listed here. The OAuth 2.0 is the standard, at least in my opinion. That's the industry standard. It's a high level of security. It's fairly complex. It takes a bit to get this set up. We'll talk a little bit about that here in another slide. But that's the standard, and it's achievable through an OpenAir script. Not terribly good. A token or a session authentication requires a static token or an easily produced session ID. It's not as secure as OAuth 2, but it's a lot simpler. And then you've got what is every tech person's favorite, the basic auth, with a username and password that is usually quote unquote encrypted, but sometimes it's just plain text that you're sending over the internet, which is a terrible, terrible idea. That's how some tools work. And when I say encrypted here, and why that's in quotes, a lot of times this basic authentication is encrypted using base 64 encoding, which any middle schooler could decode. So it's not secure by any reasonable stretch. Um, but again, there are tools out there that this is their option for authentication, and that's what you have. Now, there are some tools, Jira comes to mind, that offer a number of different authentication methods. You can go the OAuth 2 route. You can also go with the token. You can also go with their version of basic auth, which is part of this base64 encryption. It's not quite as bad as most because you're not encrypting usernames and passwords. You're encrypting client IDs and client secrets, which is already a little bit obfuscated. So those are your typical authentication methods. Now, here's some of the problems that you run into with these kinds of integrations. Number one, far and away, is OpenAir's internal script and API governance limitations. Every tool out there, just about any tool with any maturity, has put limits on their APIs. You can run this many web service calls in a day. You can make this many requests in an hour. You can pull back this amount of data, every minute or whatever it is. They all have their own governance limitations. OpenAir's is pretty strict, in my opinion, from what I've seen with other tools. It limits you to it's basically a set of units. It's a little bit hard. They've made it a little bit difficult to calculate, but you get a certain number of units every 24-hour period or with every single script run, and every call that you make to one of those services takes units. So you have to be a little bit careful in calculating what you're doing and how fast you're doing it to ensure that you don't hit these limitations. It's not terrible, but if you get a large volume, it can be a bit challenging. If you're using the OAuth 2.0 authentication method, you need a callback address, and OpenAir does not provide a callback address. So you have to have your own either generic callback address, or the tool that you're integrating with often will provide a callback. So Salesforce, for example, has its own callback address that you can use. This isn't a huge obstacle because there are many generic callouts, callbacks that you can use that work just fine and are highly secure. It's just something you have to consider if you're going to use the OAuth 2 authentication. If you're integrating with non-cloud applications, you've got to punch holes in these firewalls. Well, most network administrators, as much as they don't really want to do this, will do what they need to meet the business's obligations. However, they are expecting to open their firewall to static IP addresses. OpenAir's IP addresses are not static. Boy, that's spelled badly. They are dynamic in that they change periodically with no notice. So what OpenAir recommends is that you whitelist a domain, which does not change. Most of the IT network admin folks that I've worked with will not do that. They consider that a security risk. So this one can be a bit of a challenge if you're trying to get to a non-cloud application. Next one, if you're trying to access an external system, you've got to have admin access 9 times out of 10. Most systems require you to have that admin access to set up the configuration development at least. You may not need it going forward. You may be able to reduce the access once you have the integration built, but to get it going in the first place will require admin access. And a corollary to that is that these integrations typically require a user account for them to function as well. So like a system account within the external application. They will run under that account's permissions. Last item on here, because you're going API to API, you are restricted to whatever those APIs have exposed. So you may not have access to everything at that external system, you may only be able to do what that API allows you to do. We've seen problems with this. We have one tool that we've been trying to pull time data from, and instead of allowing us to pull any time entries that were updated or created since a certain time period, since the last time we pulled that data, this API only allows you to pull based on the date of the time entry itself. So you can say, give me all the time entries for last week. But if somebody has updated one in the past and you want to pull that, you can't say, show me what has been updated recently. So that's been a big issue with one of these APIs. That's the kind of thing that I'm referencing here. You're restricted to whatever they allow you to do. All right. So this is supposed to be a comprehensive view of all of the tools that we've successfully integrated with OpenAir scripts. It is not comprehensive. There are more than these that I don't have logos for, and we've done so many that I've lost track of all of them. But these are the major ones that we have done so far. There are a number that I need to add to this slide. We're just finished an integration with Oracle HCM, their human resources module. We've done some with tools that are more Eurocentric, that are not necessarily on this list. They're not things that we've seen a lot in the United States, but that some of our clients in the UK and other areas are using. There's a few more that need to be added to this list, but this is what we've done bulk of our work. That Jira integration we've done more times than I can even count, as well as the Salesforce integration has been very popular. We've done that a number of times. We're seeing more and more HubSpot integrations. I'll call out a couple of these that, frankly, I found to be extremely valuable. The Slack integration that you see on the left, that's been really useful. A lot of organizations are using Slack, and we can do these notifications. In a lot of cases, we can do them real time. People are able to get notified of approvals that they need to do, or late submissions or whatever. And we actually have one organization that is sending these out in terms of late submissions every hour, and just absolutely driving their people insane with this. But it gets the job done, so you can't complain. All right, that's what I had to present today. If you are interested in more information, there's our website. You can follow our tweets and sign up for our newsletters. And with that, I will stop the recording and stop the share.